Welcome to Cutting Edge Identity Verification is Transforming Financial Services, sponsored by Authentics. Here's our host, Sudan Sethuramalinkam, Head of Twitter Service Tech at Twitter.
Hello, I am Sudan Sethuramalinkam, Head of Twitter Service Tech, Twitter. I'm very pleased to be your host for today's event presented by Authentics. We want this to be an engaging conversation. So check out the dashboard at the bottom of the screen where you can find additional resources and submit questions for our panelists. You will also find our event survey there, which you can complete towards the end of the event. Lastly, we would love for you to share your thoughts on social by using the hashtag identity verification. Nowadays, identity is becoming more of a day-to-day thing, or more of like a minute-to-minute thing, everywhere in every shape and form. Identity used to be something that I use for accessing to get into a club or something. Particularly with digital identity now, it's linked to everything you do. Like this morning, I was brushing my teeth, and this toothbrush has AI built into it. It actually recognizes who is brushing and adjusts to their pressure points, like authenticating the user every second that it's brushing my teeth. That's how far we have come with identity and authentication. While social sectors and social media and shared economy are closely tied to identity, I believe financial institutions are the true trailblazers in this evolution, continuously creating safer and more convenient ways for people to lend, move, and access money from early days of digital banking to today's more robust fintech landscape. Regulatory compliance and risk management have always been key drivers for intelligent solutions, but now factors like trust, inclusivity, and user experience are also top of mind. I am very excited to explore this multifaceted topic today with our panelist, Ravi Devasetti, Global Chief Technology Officer for Consumer Information Services at Experian, Linda Duncombe, Executive Vice President and Chief Marketing Product and Digital Officer at City National Bank, Carrie O'Connor Kolaja, CEO of Authentics. Over the course of this conversation, we plan to cover the latest identity verification trends for financial service businesses as well as consumers. And what does this group think about while they're leading the way forward in these areas? Before we dive in, I want to invite each one of you to say hello, maybe share why you believe the conversation about identity is so important nowadays. Linda, if you don't mind, let's start with you, then we move on to Ravi and Carrie. Welcome.
Sure, thank you. And can you send me a note about your toothbrush? Because that sounds super impressive, by the way. So hi, everybody. I'm Duncombe. I'm delighted to be here today. I've been living in the States for 6 years and worked across two banks, a global one and one that's very domestic focused. Now with City National Bank, I think identity is really important because there are so many bad actors out there now looking for ways to take advantage of good people. And I think the way that we approach identity and in a way that hopefully is as seamless as possible for our clients is incredibly important. Looking after our clients' data and their money is fundamental to what we do. And I think it's getting harder to keep bad actors out.
Ravi? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, hello, everybody. I'm so glad to be part of this panel. Identity is very critical for the core fundamental of the financial system that we have been living. With what I'm doing at Experian and previously I worked at PayPal and Netscape, while building highly scalable available systems, identity is very critical, whether it is a payments or the credit or the way whole internet evolved. As more and more things are happening with smartphone, online banking, and it is very critical for the consumers to be able to identity themselves and also for the business to be able to serve. So identity is very critical. It comes every day, day to day, part of our technology teams to make sure that we are doing the right thing for the consumer. So I'm so glad to be part of this panel and to have the conversation here.
Thank you, Ravi. Thank you, Linda. Carrie, what is your take?
Yeah, so it's great to be here, and I have to admit, as you're talking about your toothbrush, I was thinking about my Aura ring that I've been experiencing here for the last month, which is fascinating in and of itself. And so my take, I was at PayPal for a number of years, and when I was there, I woke up every day, thinking about our mission, which was about, managing moving money and how it was a right and shouldn't be a privilege. And I truly believed in this idea of democratizing payments and financial services, which is really centered around who somebody is or who somebody isn't. And as I moved beyond payments and I started to, focus more on not just the fundamental of money, but really about identities, and having ownership of our own identity is a human right. How we verify who we are, how we access what we're entitled to, has really never been more important, as Linda and Ravi stated. And I think, as you mentioned in your opening remarks, Sudan, like, we're seeing a proliferation of these identity moments, and it is happen not just in minutes and seconds. And advancements in technology are playing a much greater role in coverage and optionality and security. And the reality is those same technologies are also advancing identity crimes. And so, how we show up to work, whether it's brushing your teeth or working out or showing up for a work call or showing up for a social call, it portrays who you are differently in your life. And I think a lot about the verifications that need to be done, and how do you balance friction and risk and security and privacy and offering choice and bettering trust. And I think this couldn't be a more instrumental time in our society to be having this conversation.
Yeah, most definitely. I think the way people look at identity now has evolved. They are more aware of what identity means, how are they using their identity. They are protective of their identity. They know how important it is and not letting it in the hands of the bad actors. So the whole industry, including our consumers, are getting behind this identity protection, as well as valuing identity more than how they might have did a few years before. So thank you for that. We will cover this in three different topics. We want to see the relationship between how financial service organizations and identity verification, what is the relationship? How have they evolved over time? The relationship between, how is financial service organization looking at identity verification? How have they evolved over time, as well as through space, because things are changing. And I want to talk about that, maybe start with Carrie. In your current role, you worked with a variety of financial service organizations. And throughout these years, are you seeing these businesses maybe sunsetting some of the traditional KYC ways and moving on to new ways? And if so, how are they doing it, and why are they doing it?
Well, I think it's interesting to have it in relation to this conversation, and all of us being, in the financial services space at some point in our career. Decades ago, the financial sector defined and really led the importance of verification. Regulation was playing a huge role. Financial crimes was really the honeypot of fraudsters, and banks and financial institutions really had to up their game. And you talked earlier about innovation, Sudan, and I think we should have that conversation and debate it a bit. Is it coming from the financial sector, or is it coming from unexpected areas? And I say that because, we've all been very familiar with KBA or with taking a picture of an ID, but now you're seeing some of the unregulated sectors. So the sharing economy, the mobility economy, maybe the content creation economy, that are taking more aggressive steps in identity verification. And they're doing it not because they're regulated, at least not now, but really to ensure trust and to ensure safety in their ecosystems. And in some ways, I have started to think that the financial sector that was once at the forefront of identity has, maybe fallen behind a little bit and needs to catch up. And if I was to say, kind of, what are the things that not only just excite me, but also make me think more provocatively about what's going on is, moving from this, you need to collect all the information, to maybe just collect the most relevant information. Or how do we collect no information in order to ensure privacy around our customers? And an example of that is something you and I were chatting about earlier is, Twitter just announced the ability to do account recovery by, messaging two people in your network and then verifying who you are without you actually having to share anything. And so those moments, I think, are becoming more and more important of how do we transform the way we verify people while keeping them safe.
Yeah, 100%. I think there are new ways people are looking into how to use a close community or a trusted circle to verify users' identity and not, use the traditional methods. So yeah, we're definitely moving towards a more open and transparent and community-based, relationship. So, Ravi, what? Sorry, Carrie, you want anything to add to it?
Yeah, I was just going to add too, and I think Melinda maybe can even comment on this before just moving on. That when you look at what happened around identity verification, not just at a individual level, but also at a business level, through the CARES Act, and I think many of us from the U.S. know this. There was a distribution of over $100 billion in fraudulent claims versus legitimate ones, and the pandemic has forced all of us to be so digitally dependent. And read a stat the other day that said like every second across the world, there's 1.7 megabits of data that's created. And every time you share data, you're sharing a little bit about yourself. So, we have to innovate and we absolutely have to change the way that we verify. Otherwise, we're not going to be keeping our customers safe. And I just think those types of stat, kind of give the magnitude of what we're up against.
To jump in there, thanks, Carrie. I'd start with the first piece around identification. And I think sometimes you're comparing a grape to a watermelon. Community identification for things like my social media platforms makes a lot of sense. But when you think about your money and your privacy around money and that kind of information, you're not so forthcoming with communities on what that looks like. And so I don't think it's a like for like comparison in that experience. It's for us, first and foremost, protect the data, protect the money. And so I don't know if the community approach will be a like-for-like comparison, although when I think of different aspects to my life, I understand how identity has evolved as it needed to evolve. I'd say around the pandemic and some of the drivers that we saw, I saw a stat that said the digital adoption and evolution of digital, of what was expected in the next 10 years happened in the first 90 days of COVID. And we saw it in our own platforms. We saw over 1,000% in some platforms or some features within platform usage that went up. And it wasn't just our younger generation clients. In fact, it was our older demographic of clients, which makes sense because they were, generally speaking, a higher risk category, so they did not want to leave their homes. And so making sure that that was a seamless experience for them and that they felt protected when they were doing their banking in a digital environment maybe was not their first choice in the past. And you think about how identity has evolved. Like 20 years ago, you went into your branch and you spoke to the bank, the branch manager, and he'd go, "Hi, Linda," and you go, "Hi, Mr. Smith," and you'd go do your banking. And that was kind of a big part of, how clients were identified. But it has become much more sophisticated as the platforms have, I think, not just progressed and become more technologically savvy, but also just as people become more geographically spaced out.
Yeah, on that, platform getting more sophisticated, how do you think our fraudsters are influencing us in our business models and innovation? Ravi, do you want to take a stab at it?
In a big way, I think. As we fintechs and financial institutions want to give the best experience to the consumers and customers, and we want to make sure that the businesses providing the right service to the right consumer, right identity, and different kinds of experiences. And fraudsters are looking into it and want to take advantage of every bit of the piece of the pie that they can get. It's fascinating as you started with the AI, right? How businesses are evolving from the technology point of view. Machine learning definitely comes into the discussion. We're talking about smartphones coming up with more and more data, rich experiences. As Linda said, traditionally we used to go to the banks, stand in and get that service. That's not acceptable anymore. Time is critical. So for that, you need to have more and more data. And while we're trying to get the data, the businesses it's an opportunity for the fraudsters also to keep up with this more and more data. As Linda mentioned about the platforms are scaling. So what is happening is the way businesses are using, whether it's a cloud, machine learning, all the technology, it's a fraudsters also trying to chase. Um, the the good news and opportunity, obviously, fraudsters don't have rules, but they have budget limitations,
Yes, yes.
and uh, businesses have rules compliance. But as a
Mhm.
community, I think it's fascinating to see we have it's like air industry, travel safety is very important. I think the community, business and fintechs, technologists working together to scale the platforms to chase the fraudsters. And in the Super Bowl ad with uh, Coinbase.com, they had to throttle the traffic with the amount of the volume that came. I'm sure it's an opportunity for fraudsters, but we as a community, I'm from the technology's point of view, we meet together with Silicon Valley and others to take this as an opportunity how to beat. You just need to beat the fraudsters, as they say. You have to be the fastest to get out of the tiger, or the phrase, right? We do need to be, because we all trying to say solve the problem, and it's actually for the community. It's our duty to be able to share, as you were saying, the community point of view, to come up with those models that are ahead of the fraudsters.
Hey,
So
Robbie,
I
can
want to
I?
follow up. Oh, sorry. Go ahead,
Sudan,
Carrie. Yeah.
yeah, I wanted to follow up on something Robbie said that I thought was interesting, and I haven't thought of it that way, which is, fraudsters have budget limitations, but businesses don't. Now, we all know that there are limitations when it comes to running and managing businesses, but as you make that statement, it's your implication that like we could get better and we should get better, even though that technology has gotten cheaper and machine learning has become almost ubiquitous now. And because of machine learning, there's types of things that we're using in order to defeat fraudsters, they're using to create more fraudulent attacks. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts a little bit more on kind of the budget analysis that you made.
Yeah, so the way I was mentioning about, for every business, there's a goal. You are serving a community, you are serving a business part of it. And there is a balanced budget. It could be dollars, cost, money, time. Time is essence and the experience. And the smooth and the frictionless you are trying to make is also an opportunity for fraudsters. And when I say budget is not just in the dollars, it's also in the time point of view. It's the customer, the community have to decide. Both the consumers and the business and the technology needs to decide what is that budget, because we as a community can win. I'm a positive person. As a community, we win together. And every time there's a technology evolution changed, there's always blockers. In this case, it's the fraudsters. Need to work together to beat the bad guys. That's where I was saying more about the good guys, and the community has more partnership, working together to beat the bad guys.
And Ravi, I think we need to kind of call it out, right? Like we spoke about this last week. Sometimes beating the bad guys means that it can't be a perfect process. Like it can't be completely seamless or frictionless, because sometimes we have to do something that may not be the best client experience. Like, for example, we may see something where a client's making a transfer and we may intervene on the digital experience and phone the client and go, hey, like this is out of character for what you do, or you typically send this amount to somebody else on a different day, or the names changed a little bit, the account numbers changed by 1 or 2 digits. Like that stuff, we're a digitally enabled relationship bank. We're not going to do one completely one way or one the other way. It's about that hybrid model. And I think we have to be more honest as any industry. And for me in banking at City National Bank, like sometimes it's not going to be perfect, but if it's not perfect means I'm going to protect your identity and your money, then I'll take that one. I'm okay with that.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm hearing from this conversation so far is There is budget, there are fraudsters, and there is community-based verification. I kind of see there is possibly a direction here we can go, make it harder for the fraudsters to use the community-based verification, as well as it's cheaper in a way for us. So I think that is a new way here. We could be mixing a couple of things here to make it harder for our fraudsters. With that, I want to move on to the next question to each one of you. Or, what are some of the notable trends or challenges from the last 12 to 18 months? The last 12 to 18 months is kind of unique because of COVID and how we have been at home. So I want you to maybe think about that time and see what are some of the notable trends or challenges you saw in your role when it comes to identity. Linda,
Yeah,
do
I
you want to
can
go?
go.
Sorry. Oh, sorry, Robbie, go ahead.
Yeah. So one of the challenges that we faced as part of the COVID was to be able to react to some of the compliance rules that are changing, and we serve the data for the financial institutions. Um, the data freshness of the data that we have to give to our financial partners changed significantly. We used to take months and weeks. Now with the COVID and the regulatory policies to be able to make a difference for the people that are impacted, we have to be real time. We have to send the freshness of the data. Thanks to all the investments we made, put us at right time to be able to scale to that level. And it was very challenging in the beginning to be able to come up with all the trends, because the financial industry believes in the trends historical, and suddenly COVID put all of that historical trends no more relevant. And we need to be fast enough to be able to come up with those models and scores to be able to not to be able to serve the right people, impacted people, and filter them from the bad guys. So that way freshness of the data was very critical, in addition to the scale and also all the models that we were building.
Great. That's a very interesting topic. I haven't never thought about it. Linda, sorry, you're going to add something. Go for it.
Yeah, no, sorry. Look, I think anyone in banking who didn't talk more broadly, inclusive of identity, is just the pull on digital was incredible, and for me, very exciting. I love that, and I love myth busting when people say, "Oh, but the more elder demographic went on it." Well, that's not true. That was our biggest spike, and has continued that way as people have started to come out of what is the new or the next norm with COVID. And identity has become incredibly important. And while people don't want a retail experience, when we show them identity or any kind of user flow in the app as an example, and we try to force them to compare to a bank, they don't want that, because that's not how they're using their phone or a digital device. They're comparing us to what's your equivalent as an industry to the one-click purchase, because we don't want to move $1 million with one click, but you have to make it feel like that for your industry. And so I would say the client base is far more vocal now on how they want those experiences to be. And as they become more highly engaged in our digital platforms, especially around payments and transfers, which has just gone through the roof on any of our platforms, on any kind of transfer, we need to get very, I think as an industry, very fast in understanding what that means for different behaviour and our overall value proposition. But I think when you think about identity, there's still a lot that our industry can do in regards to making sure it's not so clunky that it becomes impossible to do. We have to solve that where the client doesn't see the sausage making, I think, as much as they have as a group in the past.
And Linda, I'll jump on that too. One of the things that you're highlighting, and I think it has been really relevant and exciting, is how do you manage your identity and what does it mean when you share, has really come to the forefront of the conversation. So, Linda and I, worked at Citibank together in kind of their disruptive arm, and we talked a lot about financial literacy and the importance of that. And while us as institutions or as brands have a responsibility, individuals have responsibilities as well. And how do we elevate the conversation and identity and what that means and how many different ways it can mean and how it can be attacked, is really at the forefront. And I'm excited because it's necessary for us to survive. But I will say two things for me trend wise that were unexpected and accelerated. One was this move of really interesting partnerships that I don't think any of us expected. So whether it was Apple and Google that partnered together in order to detect proximity of where you were or if you were exposed during the early days of COVID. I think there was an announcement of Airbnb and I think it was VRBO that were going to come together in order to keep the home sharing ecosystem safe. And then there was another one that had transpired around Uber and Lyft. How do you working together to protect their ecosystems from bad actors, whether it was drivers particularly or riders. But while it was exciting to see these new partnerships form, like unexpected partnerships that could be pretty transformative, I'm not seeing them get to the finish line. And I think part of that has to do with this elevated conversation around privacy concerns, around data privacy concerns, information sharing concerns, and their barriers. And so for me, the trend of how do we come together in order to fight fraud and to keep our world safe and more inclusive, there's a real willingness and an intention there. But how does regulation change and has the technology play a role in allowing us to do that? Which then moves me to my second kind of area that was really interesting for me, which was this acceleration of tokenization. And I think it'd be remiss to at least not mention blockchain and distributed ledgers. And I think we were all searching for the last decade plus on what is that major use case that's going to push it over the tipping point. But tokenizing data, allowing it to be used in interesting and safe ways without sharing is definitely at the forefront. And whether you have a blockchain implementation or you're looking at verified credentials, and how do you not only just verify who I am, but where I went to school, what I'm entitled to, what my healthcare is, what my medical records are. Like that is really at the forefront now. And I think it's going to take a lot of education on all of our behalfs to have the average consumer understand what it is and why it matters. But I think it should be exciting for all of us on kind of the movement into that space.
This is great. We are touching on many topics that we want to discuss today. So first, thank you all. This is fascinating insights. I want to jump to the next topic, which I think Linda actually touched pretty much in her discussion, which is the relationship between financial service consumers and identity. We talked about the organizations. Now we want to talk a little bit about how are the consumers looking at this, right? And I think Linda mentioned, hey, we want to send $1 million with a click of a button or something, right? So Linda, maybe this is for you. How would you sum up the latest consumer expectation and preferences for identity verification? What are they demanding from a consumer standpoint?
Yeah, and Stan, it's a good point. So I think when I gave the example of the $1 million, it was that they wanted to be more than one click because they want, sometimes you can make a mistake, right? And so they want to make sure that there is that verification. What we're seeing is if we have data on our clients and they've given us consent, so you need permission to play, right? Like, and Carrie's heard me talk about this before. I think banks have more data on their clients than maybe the tax department. Like, it's extraordinary. It's about how you use that information to create meaningful experiences with permission. You need consent, right? And so when we start to build out the payments, which is typically when identity becomes really important for our clients, and different payment options, we have to do it in a way that they can see we know them. We're not asking for the same information time and time again. Otherwise, frustration becomes high and fast. So I would say as we look at these identity options, we actually do it, and again, Carrie's going to have heard me use this phrase because I love it, co-creation. As we build capabilities in our digital platforms, we ask our clients, are we approaching this in the right way? And sometimes you've got to go to market with an MVP that may not be the best, but you want to go to market, but never at the point of compromising clients' data or their money. And so what we're finding is it's not that people are saying, hey, when I buy something on Amazon, I can tap one button and I'm going straight to payment. They're not saying that. What they're saying is we have this frictionless experience that we enjoy when we're in Amazon. What is your equivalent in banking? Like, you can't just pick up that and plug it in. Like, what is your equivalent in banking? And I think as people become more comfortable and payments become more sophisticated, it's really important. And I'll give you just one really quick example because I'm a big believer of, do you buy, do you build, or do you partner? And one partnership that we did just before COVID that really came home to roost for us during COVID was with our entertainment industry. We heard an issue. So it wasn't that our client said, hey, we need you to do this. They said, when we're on the set of a movie and we might have someone there for a few days, or someone that's going to be buying particular items, something as basic as the morning tea or a particular prop, how do we get their money where they're not having to get a check and go to the bank? And so we did the first partnership in the US with Extend, which was a virtual commercial card where you can give someone a card for a limited period of time with a limited balance. And then when it expires, it automatically drops off the system. And that for us was really important because it was around payment, and the identity is built into that. But it was hearing a client's problem and then saying to ourselves, okay, they're on a movie set and they don't know how to get payments to people in a really simple way where they're not having to find a branch with a check. How do we do that for them? And that's why we did the partnership with Extend. And I think like kind of breaking it down like that and not always looking for the client to be able to articulate for us what they want. It's about how do we solve. And I think that's how we've also approached identity.
That's great. I think co-creation is the word, and I think you just expanded more on that. That's amazing how we are looking at identity verification for the future, creating along with our customers. That's awesome. And again, that kind of touches base with what Ravi was talking before about fraudsters having a budget versus delighting customers. So I think what Linda just explained was a delightful customer. Giving them a limited access to the card, limited time, limited spend. It's easy for them in that situation. So Ravi, how do you see that as fraudsters taking advantage of something like that, like a new feature that's going to delight the customers? And what are you doing to differentiate this fraudsters from good customers?
Yeah, and they're looking for all kinds of opportunities. I think, as Linda was mentioning, it's a frictionless experience. Customers want simple safety and security. Customers want control. One of the things we noticed in the trends, consumers love when they have the control. Consent is very critical. And we built something called Permission Hub. You could manage, consumer can manage what control or what kind of profile, what kind of experience, how they're sharing, how they're working with banking or the payments. They have those choices. So it's very important for the institutions, as Carrie was mentioning, to be able to use the technologies like tokenization to keep the consumers' data secure and safe while balancing and providing the control. For fraudsters, you are going to look for every opportunities to be able to tap it, whether it is breaking the tokenization tokens. We saw even blockchains getting broken. Blockchains supposed to be the most safety and secure. You wouldn't expect that to happen, right? And it is a decentralized. There's no central one system that cannot be broken, but we are seeing those trends. So fraudsters are going to look for that. I think it's the combination of the consumer and the institutions with that consent is very critical to be able to that build solid foundation to beat or at least meet to be faster than the fraudster.
No, that's a good point. Yeah. Carrie, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to add to this because as I'm hearing my colleagues talk, and control is and permission, consent is absolutely key. I tend to think that there's two other things that are also key. One is about context, and another one is about choice. And we don't necessarily think about those things as it relates to identity, but when you look, behind the back office of what does it mean to verify, and when you verify, and how you verify, it becomes contextual in nature. I think Linda used the example of, one click sending $1 million. The reality is that, a behavior of sending $1 million when you typically send $1 or $10 is very different. And those become those verification moments or those identity moments where the context of the decision, and that context either being how much money is being sent that's out of norm, where that money is being sent from, maybe the use case or the purchase, or who you're sending it to. I think we have this really unique opportunity to to change the way in which we verify and how we increase the friction in those moments where we're uncertain to ensure we keep the bad guys out. And so the context around what's happening in a situation when, in this case, money gets moved, managed, et cetera, becomes really, really important. And then control. And I know this may seem a little bit out there, but in a world where everybody wants ease and convenience, I do think people want choice. And we look at that, what's happened lately, with the government, and there's been a lot of discussion with the IRS putting in new digital flows, and them talking about forcing to use a biometric signature. And I know that there's also been a lot of discussion of how do you not force that. And I do think it needs to be about choice to some degree. So I shouldn't have to choose whether or not I give a biometric signature in order to submit my taxes online, just like I shouldn't have to choose in order for there to be a streaming live webcam open while my kid goes to school online. These choices we have to make as end consumers of verification while also sharing information, but being, inclusive in, what we can participate in our society. So I do think that, choice is going to play a bigger role. And I do think the context around what we're verifying people to do is going to become increasingly important. And whether that's, adding friction or removing friction to an experience.
Yeah, totally. I think,
yeah, the context is so critical. I actually want to take that opportunity. You mentioned about the use case about the $1 million. Completely, it's a separate kind of fraud model, all that. But we also have other extreme about the financial inclusion, which is something I'm very passionate, and a lot of my colleagues work with nonprofit organizations, because there are a lot of unbanked population don't even have this kind of luxury, and many of the friction points that we put it could impact them not even getting into the mainstream. So that context and control is very important, critical, while we are trying to manage the fraudsters and give the frictionless, and then you have the other side of the community completely not even part of this. So as a community, we have opportunity and also duty to be able to expand this um, whole system to get more and more financial inclusive.
yeah, I think what I'm hearing more here is making it, get the consent from the user, make sure it's easy, give them choices. And all of these things are going to help, grow the business as well as make it more frictionless for our user. So is there any specific
If I can jump in
opportunity?
there for one
Yeah,
sec,
go ahead.
let's go. Sorry.
Yeah.
I think making it easy, but that's not always going to be possible. So when it's not, explain why. People are reasonable. If you say, hey, we've had to do X, Y, or Z because of a heightened risk, people will be appreciative of that. So while you want to make it easy and as frictionless as possible, there are some times where that's not going to be, you're not going to just be able to deliver on that. And so I think how you tell your client why something isn't as seamless as they expect it to be, because you're trying to protect their identity, their data, their money. I haven't seen a client who's not reasonable to that conversation. So when we have to ring because something doesn't quite look right, clients are appreciative that we've got our eye on this. Like we have controls in place that alert things to us, so we know that it needs a closer look, a deeper dive, and it may be a little bit more clunky for the client, but they're appreciative that we are asking those questions.
100%. I can, completely agree. I kind of lock myself out of the child lock on Amazon Prime Video, and it took me a while to get back in to remove those child lock. I was thrilled. So my daughter wouldn't do it on herself very easily, frictionless. She cannot get it. I can't even get it. So.
Oh my gosh, we're so related. That sounds like something I would do.
But Sudan, they would learn. I used to hide my iPad, but then next time they would hide before I hide.
Yes. The little fraudsters are getting, their unlimited budget.
Different type of fraud there, although it could be equally
gosh, I love it.
expensive.
Cool. Last topic for the day. I would, enjoy talking to you about everything, but kind of like the last topic that we want to cover, one big thing is how do you anticipate the future of identity in financial services, right? This could be just, you think about what is the cutting edge happening using blockchain. And we touched base a little bit about blockchain, but we didn't get into it deeply. So are you seeing anything innovative in this space, particularly identity and blockchain playing a role? And it's kind of an open topic, but I do want to start with Ravi, because you kind of started with a little bit on the blockchain topic, and then we will go around. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think it's fascinating what blockchain is doing. Supposed to be just a Bitcoin or doggy coin, just playing with the currency part of it. But from the technology point of view, it's actually uh, influencing huge in terms of scale and also tokenization, which is what we have started, I think, even before blockchain started, but then blockchain enabled come up with the ledger concept, all that. But it's also fascinating to see what's happening in the identity. I keep learning still the NFTs and the crazy that's happening, then how the price can go up. Um, I am very, very optimistic and opportunistic to see what's happening with all the trends that going on, whether it's not just in the um, crypto.com or the currency exchange, but also how we are going to use that technology on the back office, especially for the institutions to be able to scale. We talked about the machine learning, and there are lots of historical models. I would say an augmentation, and there's a lot of back office manual heavy lifting that we need to do with blockchain machine learning. I'm hoping the as we are doing more and more control, more and more opportunities, hopefully blockchain machine learning scales us to be able to reduce the manual work. May not be completely eliminated, but manual work, so that way you are chasing. As we are providing more, we are also enabling our back office, our customer agents to be able to get the same details as the consumer frictionless or the fraudster gets. And if you are enabling our all the people that work behind the scenes, right? We talk about the technology and we are serving the ATM tellers or the customer agent when you call or the chatbot. You enable them, empower them with all the attributes, models, so that way they have details to provide the best customer experience and best validation, frictionless experience to the consumer.
Yeah, great, great. Anything Linda or Carrie want to add? Doesn't have to be specific to blockchain. Anywhere you see the future of identity going, please share.
I mean, I'll jump in here. By the way, it's for me, it's not just about the scaling with the blockchain, it's also privacy, and data protection in which it can provide. But, one of the things that I think is more and more at the forefront of reality than ever is this notion of an identity wallet. So much like what's transpired over the last decade or two with payments, as different modalities emerged and different type of payment instruments became more and more accessible, we have digital wallets, and sometimes it's a branded wallet, sometimes it's not. But this mechanism of where you can start to store your financial credentials to gain access to what you're entitled to, what you deserve, what you've earned, has accelerated, as we know, as we've moved into contactless payments. If you liken that to the identity space, using blockchain and using context and using data signals, what does an identity wallet look like? And how do you store those credentials, and how do you revoke them if you want to recapture access to your information that you may be given an institution? And I think Linda or Ravi brought up earlier that, financial organizations have a mass amount of information on consumers. And the reality is any research you do, an individual consumer would probably trust their bank more with their identity than they will, others. And I know people say that's different depending on studies and generations, but I do think that, the opportunity for us to think about credentialing, different aspects of who we are and how it's being used that's within our control is really at the forefront. And I also say, because I think Linda and Ravi and I, and Sudan, I think you do as well, really share the same kind of passion around inclusion. And as we know, there's over 1 billion people in this world that don't have a government issued identity. And people often ask, well, if you're doing digital issuances of IDs, is that going to be more problematic? And I actually think it becomes more of an opportunity because 90% of this world now has a mobile phone, and even the feature phones have some smart, capabilities on it. And so if you look at that, we actually have an opportunity using blockchain and tokenization to issue those, billion people plus a trusted identity that they can use to gain more access to things in their lives versus it being a paper issuance. So I think there's a real opportunity here with where we are in our society, and it does talk to inclusion and it does talk to access.
Yeah,
I'll just
thank you.
really quickly, I think both Ravi and Harry covered it off really well. From a banking perspective and from where I sit within City National Bank, this is something that I would not want to be first to market with. In complete transparency, we'll watch to see what happens with blockchain and identity. My first and foremost priority is to protect our clients' data and their money and their identity. And so we will test and learn in very small kind of environments. I do think blockchain is an important tool or platform that will be used more broadly. I think looking at wallets generally, it's a good call out by Carrie, will be where a lot of good lessons can be learned. And I do think that while banking has a role to play here because of the nature of what we do in the broader economy or community, there is a lot of people that don't have banking accounts, to Ravi's point. And someone who also looks after community at City National Bank, that's really important to us because we want to make sure that we're very much involved in our community. So how do you make sure everybody's identity is protected, whether you're their bank or you're just a member of your community? I will just add that, just as an example, completely aside, as I was listening to this whole identity piece, something that I have seen more qualitatively is there are people that are distrustful of identity wallets, and how do we overcome that as a community or a society? So the newest example was I was literally at a major event on the weekend, and people were like, well, we have photos of our COVID vaccination cards. Like how easy is that to make some kind of fraudulent copy of? And my response is in Australia, like that's all in a digital wallet where it would be a lot harder to do what we're talking about. And you can't just have a photo of your card in your wallet. And I'm not making a political statement here. I'm making an observation about adoption and people wanting to believe. And I feel like we have a responsibility to show them why this is important and what they will get for that exchange. To Carrie's point earlier, like I am more aware now of my identity than I ever was, and I'm incredibly protective of who I give information to. I want that value exchange to be something that I better understand as a consumer. And someone who has a big role of that in the bank, I think about that a lot.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. This is great. We got a couple of questions from the audience, so let's try to jump in on here. The first one is from Stephen Dilmore. In reference to the fraudulent unemployment claims, states engaged ID.me using facial recognition for ID verification. IRS also indicated partnership with ID.me. There is data showing racial bias in the technology. There was uproar against use of IRS/ID.me, but now not really for the unemployment claims. The same issues are there in both. My feeling is that the company and states took advantage of the situation to build a database of faces for one-to-many comparison. What are your thoughts on this type of activity putting our identities at risk?
I'll take a stab at that, and then I'll look to maybe Ravi to talk about the biases or the non-biases. How do you compensate for that in machine learning and algorithms? So I don't necessarily think, and I'm not making a political statement, I don't think that the government and others were trying to take advantage of the situation. I I recognize, and I think that what they were trying to do is to adopt some of the sophisticated technology that we use in the private sector and apply it to the public sector, because as what was stated earlier in this panel, that the expectation is not necessarily what kind of experience I'm getting from the government versus I'm getting from Airbnb or PayPal or Experian. It's my expectation is I get a good experience that's accessible, that allows me to perform the tasks in the job that needs to get done. Um, what I think causes me to question is what was the implementation like, and how do we make sure that, you know, as we're moving forward, and particularly the private or the public sector is starting to adopt these new technologies, they do it with the same thoughtfulness and thoroughness of what is happening to the information, how's that information being processed, how do consumers deserve the right or get access in order to delete that information. And so, you know, I don't believe it was about taking advantage of anything. I think if you look across the world, there's a lot of governments who have deployed trust frameworks and digital identity or national identity programs and have done it successfully. And so unfortunately, with the pandemic, I think there's a rush to do what's right with the right intentions. But sometimes, as we know, when you're rushing, there are risks and there are, you know, opportunities to make mistakes. So on the biasy side, you know, I'm happy to talk about, but Ravi, I think it'd be good for maybe you to touch on that there are ways to deploy non-biased coding in machine algorithms.
Yeah, absolutely, Carrie. And as you said, I don't think there's any bad intent. Of course, I don't know all the details, but as you said, I think it's a right thing to do from the in the digital world. It is one more opportunity. But to your question on the machine learning, there's something called explainability. When you build a model in the machine learning, how machine learning works, it takes the past historical trends and takes some known decisions and uses the multiple data and then uses the machines to come up with the new models. But companies don't launch those models immediately. There is a lot of sophistication. It's more technical depth, something called explainability, which goes to the model, takes against the data set, trained data set, and then launches the model. And that's what used to happen even before the machine learning. In the traditional world, you come up with a new model to be able to find the credit worthiness or find the right identification. You go and validate it. There's a huge investments happens across the board in terms of validating a model whenever you change an algorithm before you go and launch it. So it is a tough problem. It's not something that companies take it easily. So what I know personally, and also my colleagues, we take it very seriously across the technology organizations to make sure that whatever the machine learning models are traditional models, you spend a lot of time to validate it, test it, to make sure that there's no bias.
Thank you. Thank you all. I want to say thank you so much to Carrie, Linda, and Ravi here for your time, their busy schedule. Needless to say, we could have spent hours talking about this. Maybe we would do a part two. Who knows, right? Before I move on to key takeaways, a quick reminder to our audience to check out the short event survey available in the dashboard at the bottom of your screen. We would really appreciate your feedback as we continue to build and optimize the future content. And just key takeaways from today's one. One, we talked about community-based verification and how it may or may not work for financial institutions. We did talk about the data freshness and how COVID kind of affected the data, which many of our models depend on. And also, we talked about consent, getting consent from the user, co-creating a future along with our consumers, bringing them as part of the future that you are building. And blockchain, we talked a lot about that. So thank you all. Personally, I do think about identity a lot. Identity for me provides access, acts as a passport to explore new territories. It gives you businesses grow and stuff. So I would say there are still a lot of people without access to internet, without access to a quality camera or even a government issued ID. So while we build this future, we should remind ourselves of all the people who do not even have an ID, and what are we doing to help spaceport their life to these new galaxies. What are we doing to give them the ID that acts as the passport to explore new businesses and new opportunities? So I hope you were inspired by this conversation. Remember to share your thoughts using the hashtag identity verification. And thank you all for joining us, and have a great day. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Pleasure.